Thanks for your wonderful thoughts and questions on the TARDIS segment. While I'm preparing part 2, I came across a question that praised a shot from the Star Beast that reminded me that literally we almost didn't get to include the shot in the show because we couldn't figure out how to do it. It became the impossible shot. And of course, we could figure out a way to do it if we had all the time and the money. You can do pretty much anything in that case. But within our time and our budget, we were flummoxed. Here's the shot. So you're probably thinking, okay, that looks a little bit complicated maybe, but what's the big deal? So that's what I'm here to tell you about. But for those who like a puzzle, how did we film it? And what was the big deal? One thing I want to mention is that it takes me a bunch of time to make these videos. One of the slowest parts is that I have to find all the original media, which means, depending on what I'm doing, the storyboards, the visual ideas, the concept drawings, my photos, scripts. That can be a major hunt. And while I'm doing that, I invariably fall down a rabbit hole of memories, as well as sifting through things like this. Yeah, a bunch of photos of boring parking lots that we went to recce to find the one that we used in the Star Beast. So much glamour. So why don't I delete these? I don't know. Maybe I'll need them one day. And if I delete things, no matter how random, someone always asks me for them. To quote Taxi Driver, one day I will get organized. So here's the question that was asked. My favorite shot of the Star Beast is when we see Unit and the Roth warriors battling on the street, and then the camera pans to the Doctor and Noble family sneaking away in the house attics. My question, which is their question, is how early are big shots like this decided on? Because some smaller conversational scenes, I imagine, could be tweaked on the spot. Boy, did you hit on a relevant shot that sparked a huge set of complexities. This shot was actually specified in the script. Exterior, Donna Street. Camera craning up from gunfire explosions to find roof level, number 44's attic, and then the Velux, I think it's Velux, not Velux, the Velux window, the Dr. Donna, Rose, Sean, and then the Meep, and then Sylvia, all secretly tiptoeing across, escaping. So I can't take credit for coming up with this shot, as a matter of fact, or blame actually. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't in the script, I doubt that I would ever have been given permission to do it, cost-wise, time-wise, and complexity-wise. But that'll become clearer as we go through the video. The first problem was a bigger one, which was just how hard it was to shoot the battle sequence in total. And the first issue of that was that we were filming in the UK in May and June, and it was a night sequence, and it's only dark in London from maybe about 10 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. So we have this complicated battle sequence with cars exploding and Roth warriors heading down the street, and it's obviously going to take more than 6 hours to shoot. So now we have to film over several nights, but what residential street is going to let us be there all night for several nights? So here's the street we used, and there's a ton of houses on it, and who wants a noisy film crew shooting guns and phasers and blowing up cars on your street all night for several nights? And we have to move your personal cars, so you lose your parking, and we have to ask you to turn your lights on and off at our whim. And the whole street has to be okay with this for several nights long. So yeah, like, really? So it took genius location managing, but we found a wonderful collaborative street in Cardiff. But since Donna's house is supposed to be London, classically these houses are 3 stories, with the top being the interconnecting attics. So when the art department did their first concept art for it, and here we are, you can see that the attic spaces were quite big, and the windows were flat on the top story, and it made sense for them to go from attic to attic to attic. But the Cardiff houses were 2 stories with small attic spaces, and it didn't work for the shot. And they didn't have windows. Well, they had the flat windows, but it didn't make sense for attics. So the suggestion was that we put in the skylight Velux windows, but we weren't actually going to do that to the houses. That meant that they had to be visual effects, and this seemed to be the best way to make the house exteriors be believable for the action. In the meantime, we couldn't use the attics that were actually on the location because not only were they not interconnected, but they were way too small for us to do the work. So let's back up and break down the shot parts. The camera looks down the street at the raging battle. then cranes up and spins around to look down into the Velix window, and we see our gang sneaking through. We were already building 2 stories of Donna's house interior on the stage because a ton of action took place in it, and we were blowing up the back of the house, and we would never be able to do it in a practical house, with the backside being blown off and everything. The art department designed the ground floor and 1 floor up connected to each other so we could go up the stairs, but we didn't have room, and we couldn't do 3 attics on top of that. So the attic set had to be a completely separate set of attic spaces because we needed all 3 of them. And they had to be raised up on platforms because the actors needed to appear through the hatch from the floor below. And every time you raise a set on a platform, it adds a huge expense, and you have health and safety issues, and it's just a much bigger build. But this is what we built. They also had to create the walls in between where the sonic could knock them down. When the walls are up, where is the camera going to go before any of the partitions have been brought down? Each attic space was really small. Here's the art director demonstrating for me just how small they intended to build it and how tiny the hole would be where the actors had to sneak through. This was realistic for the actual exterior space, and the smaller it was, the more affordable. But I knew we had to get 4 actors in there and the MEP into the space, plus the camera, so I did have to request that they expand it a little bit. Aside from the action within the attics, then we had to film from the outside of the set to look down through the Velix window to see the actors sneaking across. Since we shot the set before the big attic exterior, we had to make guesses about the height and the speed and the action that would take place when we shot the actual battle and the real roof. So in an ideal world, we would have shot in the opposite order. It would be much easier to match the interior to the big plate shot. But hey, when in the world of filmmaking is it ever the ideal world? Not in my universe, anyway. One of the differences between the 60th anniversary specials and my previous Who experiences was that there was a previous company, Painting Practice, who was part of the deal. And they did artwork with the art department, and they did extra designs, and they did designs for VFX, and they scanned sets into 3D models, and they were able to previs some shots. So it was incredibly important that they previs this shot for us. Here's what they gave us as a successful proof of concept for the shot, but also it's easier to do it in the computer than in real life. But as mentioned, our roof didn't have the window, and we were shooting out of order, so the big question came up as to how we could match the move to map the window into the rooftop. The visual effects company thought that the art department was going to build a whole rooftop and they could put a moving split screen on the roof's edge, except that wasn't happening. The art department didn't have any money to build the exterior roof. All they could do was put the hole in the set so we could see the actors inside. So now VFX is worried that they have to build a whole CG roof to get the camera move to work. And we don't even have Flying Roarth to create a wipe to match the shots because we didn't have any rooftop on the window set. This also ignores the fact that as much as we all wanted Flying Roarth in the shot, they weren't budgeted for this shot, so that was a no-go. If we'd had the ability to match the moves with a computerized repeatable head, that would have worked, but the only way we could have gotten the camera high enough above the rooftop was to use a drone, and those are not repeatable, as anyone who's played with drones knows. So basically, it seemed like we were screwed. So the VFX company put an exorbitant bid on the shot because they were afraid that they were going to have to do all this additional CG work. Consequently, this led to the obvious question, which is, do we really need the shot? Can we just cut it? But Russell wanted it, and it seemed to me and to the smart production team who was supporting this that there had to be an easier solution. We weren't going to give it up just like that. The requirement of using a drone made even getting the shot touch and go because drones have a lot of limitations and we didn't have the top models, so the atmospheric conditions were critical. We can't have too much rain, we can't have too much wind, particularly wind. It also seemed like the difficult issue of matching speed and height was nothing compared to how we could even schedule getting the shot. Let's step back a second and just discuss how difficult the scheduling issues were to fit the whole battle sequence into 3 days. We needed to work in a certain order so that the destruction was progressive. We couldn't destroy something and then go back and have a clean street. And so we couldn't shoot everything in one direction and then the other direction, which is ideal. We couldn't shoot things and blow them up and put them back and reset the whole street. And then we had the big truck to blow up. And we had to do that at the beginning of a night because we couldn't set off a big explosion while people were sleeping. We had to fit the drone shot on the best weather day, and it wasn't guaranteed that the best weather day was going to fit into the right moment in the battle. In addition, it took a long time to get the Roth warriors into full costume, and they couldn't stay in their stilt legs very long. So we had a complete three-dimensional tic-tac-toe set of issues with how to schedule the whole thing. We had comprehensive shot lists and storyboards, but that many factors don't just fall into place. So we had to go in and just shoot the drone whenever the atmospheric conditions were good, and we had to be prepared with a battle sequence for that no matter what. So that's a lot. I mean, it was just a lot. And it really is quite a miracle that we managed to get the shot at all. In the meantime, we were still struggling with solving the problem of how to map the two shots together. So I used one of my lifelines, and I phoned a really smart friend to see what ideas he might have to actually simplify the shot without us losing it. And he immediately got it. And he basically told me that the shot was less complicated than everyone was saying. And he proceeded to explain the 3D math of it. And because the ZZ axis was very forgiving in the shot, we simply didn't need to worry as much as we were. I suddenly realized that we were going to be fine. What had been really worrying me and the producers was the demand on the drone to be so accurate would mean that we spent a ton of time on the shot, and we didn't have a ton of time on the shot. And this brings a lesson for new filmmakers or for students. You have to be responsible for your schedule. And so if we spent too much time on this drone shot, other parts of the sequence would have been in jeopardy, and we absolutely couldn't afford to spend too much time shooting a rooftop. But in the end, the drone pilot did an amazing job, and we got a beautiful shot to work with, and we moved right on, and we started blowing other things up. You, as a director, have to control your schedule and make decisions and compromises all day long, and that's a huge part of the job. I mean, reality bites. Then came the additional concern that the shot was somehow too long as the camera crosses the roof. And if it was too long and boring in that dead space, that would force an edit. And the whole point was not to put an edit into it. And that brings us to the flying Roths. And we all wanted to add flying Roths to make the shot more interesting, but they weren't budgeted for this shot. When we went into shooting, we only had budget to use them in the shot of them blowing up the back of the house. But this being Doctor Who, in the end, everybody wanted this extra creativity. And VFX said, we will find the money as long as they didn't need to do any more 3D work on the shot. So if you look at the shot carefully, you'll see that the flying Roths move only in one plane. So again, we're into axes, and they're in shadow. So they were able to do a much more simple, compromised version of the shot. I think that's probably detail enough. I probably lost you at minute 2. I won't be surprised when I look at analytics and see that everybody dropped out of this video. But the point is, this is just one shot among so many others. Imagine the complexity of the entire episode. For the second part of the question, we could not have done this without all this pre-planning. And yes, simple dialogue scenes are much easier to plan and can change on the fly. So thank you for that question. And gotta say it, like, subscribe, help make the channel a success so I can get more sorting out of my chaos and get organized. Thanks.